She lost her fiancé and accidentally wedded a poor man, not knowing he was a secret millionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Claire's life. The church bells rang. Guests filled every seat. The scent of roses drifted through the air. She stood in her wedding gown, veil glowing under the afternoon Sunday. Then the door slammed open. Her fiancé's mother walked in, eyes cold as stone. "He is not coming," she said. "My son cannot marry beneath him. You are not worthy of our family." The bouquet slipped from Claire's hands. White petals scattered across the marble floor. Gasps echoed down the hall. Phones came out, recording her humiliation. In one moment, her future shattered. She was no longer a bride. She was a spectacle. Her heart pounded. Shame burned through her chest. But under that fire was pride. She would not crawl. She would not let them write her ending. Her eyes searched the crowd. Then she saw him, Daniel, a quiet man in the last row. His suit worn, his shoes scuffed. A man people ignored. Claire walked straight to him. Each heel strike echoed in the silent church. Whispers rose behind her. She stopped in front of him and spoke clearly. "Marry me, right here, right now." Daniel froze. His eyes widened. He looked at the crowd, then back at her. He saw her pain, her defiance. Slowly, he nodded. The priest hesitated, but the room waited. And so, the vows meant for a grand union became a desperate rebellion. Claire and Daniel signed the papers. The pen scratched across the page. With that sound, their fates locked together. Laughter rose from the guests. Some mocked, some pitied. But Claire lifted her chin, daring them to sneer louder. Daniel stood calm, unreadable. To the world, she had fallen from grace. To them, she had married a man with nothing. But no one knew the truth. Not the guests. Not even Claire. Daniel's modest suit and quiet life hid a secret powerful enough to silence every voice in that church. And so it began. A marriage born from impulse. A union that seemed fake. But one day would turn into real love. The next morning, the weight of what had happened settled heavily on Claire's shoulders. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of the small apartment she now shared with Daniel. Gone were the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of her old life. Instead, chipped paint on the walls and the faint hum of traffic outside greeted her. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, still in disbelief. She stared at the marriage certificate lying on the coffee table. Her own signature looked foreign, as if written by someone else. The night before had felt like a fever dream, but the papers in front of her proved it was real. She was married. Married to a man she barely knew. Daniel emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of instant coffee. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly damp from a quick shower. He placed 1 mug in front of her. "Morning," he said simply. Claire blinked at him, her pride and confusion twisting inside. This cannot be real. We are married because I wanted to prove a point. That does not make us a real couple." Daniel nodded calmly. "I know, but the papers are signed. We cannot undo that overnight." Her chest tightened. She had expected him to argue, maybe even gloat. Instead, his tone was level, almost detached, as if he had no expectations from her. That unsettled her even more. The first days of their shared life became a test of patience. Claire was used to long dining tables, polished silverware, and maids who prepared breakfast. Here, she found herself burning toast and eating from mismatched plates. Daniel did not complain. He poured his coffee, packed his modest lunch in a brown paper bag, and left for work each morning, pedaling away on his old bicycle. When neighbors noticed Claire moving into Daniel's apartment, whispers spread quickly. "She was supposed to marry into wealth," they muttered. "Now she lives with him? What a fall." Claire heard them on the stairwell. Their judgment stung like fresh wounds. That evening, when Daniel returned, sweat on his brow and grease on his hands from a long day of work, he found Claire standing by the window, arms crossed tightly. "I cannot do this," she said sharply. "I cannot live like this. I went from a mansion to this tiny place. Do you know what people are saying about me?" Daniel set down his bag, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Yes. They are saying you married a poor man. And they are right." His bluntness stunned her. She expected him to defend himself, to justify his worth. But he did not. He accepted the label society gave him, without shame. That honesty frustrated her more than any insult could. The clashes continued. She criticized his habits, how he left his bicycle by the door, how his shoes carried dust into the apartment, how his meals were too plain. Daniel listened, nodded, and carried on. He did not fight back, but he did not change either. One night, after another argument, Claire stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. Daniel stayed in the living room, quietly fixing a loose button on her coat that she had tossed aside earlier. His hands were steady, his face unreadable. He did not know that this small act of care would plant a seed in her heart, one she would only recognize much later. For now, the gap between them grew wider. To Claire, he was a stranger who had stepped into her life at its lowest point. To Daniel, she was a woman drowning in wounded pride. They were bound by paper, but not yet by trust. And so, what had begun as a bold act of defiance now settled into a fragile coexistence. A marriage in name only, a daily clash of worlds. But even in the silence, even in the friction, something unspoken began to stir. Days turned into weeks, and the uneasy routine between Claire and Daniel grew heavier with every passing moment. The little apartment had walls that seemed to listen, walls that held their silence and their clashes alike. Claire still carried herself with the grace of a woman who once lived among chandeliers, but inside she was unraveling. The whispers from neighbors did not fade. In fact, they sharpened. Women at the corner store lowered their voices, but not enough to be unheard. "That is the girl who lost her rich fiancé," one said. "Now she lives with the man who fixes bicycles." Laughter followed like knives. Claire felt the sting every time she stepped outside. The ridicule did not stop with strangers. One afternoon, while Claire was walking through the market, she ran into Madison, her former bridesmaid. Madison's smile was laced with cruelty. "Claire," she cooed, pretending sympathy, "I heard about your marriage. Bold choice. But I suppose it is better than being alone." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, who was carrying a bag of vegetables behind Claire. "Does he even own a car?" Claire's face burned as Madison and her friends burst into mocking laughter. Daniel said nothing. He simply adjusted the bag on his shoulder and kept walking. His silence infuriated Claire more than Madison's taunts. That night, she confronted him. "Why did you not say anything? Why do you let people talk to us like that?" Her voice trembled with anger. Daniel looked at her calmly. "Because their words do not change who we are. Let them laugh." His calmness only made her feel smaller, more exposed. To Claire, every cruel whisper was proof that she had made a mistake, that marrying him had dragged her down into ridicule. The tension inside their apartment deepened. Claire slammed doors more often. Daniel spent longer hours outside, fixing broken pipes, painting fences, taking jobs that left his hands calloused and his clothes stained. The more he worked, the more she resented the sight of his worn shoes by the door. One evening, as Claire returned from a failed attempt to find work herself, she found her ex-fiancé, Thomas, waiting outside the building. He was leaning casually against a black car, polished and gleaming under the streetlights. His suit was sharp, his smile sharper. "Claire," he greeted, his tone dripping with mock pity. "So this is where you live now. From mansions to this." He gestured toward the cracked steps of the apartment building. "You deserve better than this. Come back to me." Claire froze, her pride and pain colliding inside her. "You left me at the altar," she snapped. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." Thomas smirked. "That was a mistake. I let my mother control me. But look at you now, married to a man who cannot even afford a proper suit. Do you really think this is where you belong?" Daniel arrived at that moment, wiping his hands with a rag, still in his work clothes. Thomas's smirk widened. "Speak of the devil, the husband." He looked Daniel up and down with open disdain. "Tell me, how much do you make fixing pipes and carrying groceries? Enough to feed her pride? Or just enough for instant noodles?" Claire's heart twisted. She wanted Daniel to fight back, to defend her honor, to shout Thomas down in front of everyone. But Daniel's eyes remained steady. He did not argue. He simply took Claire's hand and guided her past Thomas without a word. Inside the apartment, Claire pulled away sharply. "Why did you let him talk to you like that? Why did you let him humiliate us?" Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "Because I do not need his approval, and neither should you." But to Claire, silence felt like surrender. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, torn between shame and longing for the life she had lost. The world saw her as a woman who had thrown her future away for a poor man. Her ex-fiancé was circling like a vulture, reminding her of what she had lost. And Daniel, the man she had married, seemed unmoved by the ridicule, unwilling to fight in the way she wanted him to. The distance between them widened, not with silence alone, but with doubt. And in that space, Claire wondered if her impulsive decision had doomed her to a life of regret. The days that followed were filled with cold silences and sharp words. Claire barely spoke to Daniel, and when she did, her tone was edged with bitterness. The walls of their small apartment seemed tighter than ever, pressing them into an uncomfortable closeness. Yet, beneath the anger, something unexpected began to stir. One evening, rain poured heavily over the city. Claire returned home from the grocery store, her umbrella broken by the wind, her clothes soaked through. She fumbled with the apartment key, shivering as water dripped down her hair. The door opened before she could unlock it. Daniel stood there, holding out his old but sturdy coat. "Take this," he said simply. He draped it over her shoulders without waiting for her protest. The warmth of the fabric startled her more than the storm outside. For a moment, she caught his eyes steady, unassuming, and full of a quiet care that she had not noticed before. The next morning, Claire found her coat hanging neatly by the door, a button she had lost weeks ago, now firmly sewn back into place. She touched it, realizing Daniel must have fixed it while she was asleep. No words, no announcements, just a quiet act of kindness. Claire tried to dismiss it, but the small gestures kept coming. When her shoes broke, Daniel repaired them with careful hands. When she struggled to carry groceries, he wordlessly took the heavier bags. He never asked for gratitude. He never demanded recognition. He simply did what needed to be done. One night, Claire overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, almost weary. "Yes, I will work the night shift. Do not worry about the payment. I will cover it." He paused. "No, do not tell Claire. She does not need to know." The words caught her off guard. She had assumed his odd jobs were only to keep himself afloat. But he was also quietly paying her share of the bills, shielding her from burdens she did not even realize existed. That evening, as she set dinner on the table, nothing more than simple soup and bread, she studied him. His hands were rough, his shirt still stained from work, but his face held no resentment. He ate with quiet contentment, as though he was grateful simply to share a meal together. Claire felt an ache in her chest she could not name. For so long she had measured worth by wealth, status, and appearances. Yet here was a man who asked for none of those things. A man who showed love not through grand gestures but through steady, unseen acts. One afternoon, as they walked back from the market, the same group of neighbors who had mocked her before appeared. Their laughter rose as they whispered behind their hands. Claire's stomach tightened, bracing for the sting. But before the words could pierce her again, Daniel stepped slightly ahead of her, blocking their view with his presence. He said nothing, but his stance was protective, as though daring anyone to touch her dignity. For the first time, Claire did not feel humiliated. She felt shielded. Later that night, she sat on the balcony, the cool air brushing against her face. Daniel joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one in front of her. Silence lingered between them, but it was not the same heavy silence of before. It felt softer. "Why do you do it?" she finally asked, her voice breaking the stillness. "Why do you keep helping me when I treat you like this?" Daniel looked at her with the same calm eyes she had begun to notice more often. "Because that is what you do when you care about someone. You do not keep score. You just show up." Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to argue, to deny the warmth spreading in her chest, but the words would not come. Instead, she sipped the tea he had placed in her hands, the steam curling upward like a quiet reminder of everything unsaid. For the first time since their rushed marriage, Claire wondered if she had judged him too quickly. Perhaps the man she called poor had given her something far richer than wealth, something she had never truly experienced before. Kindness without condition. The fragile peace between Claire and Daniel did not last long. For every quiet act of kindness that softened her heart, the world outside sharpened its cruelty. Gossip spread like wildfire, feeding on her humiliation. At the cafe near her old neighborhood, Claire overheard former acquaintances whispering, "Did you see her? She married a poor man. Imagine falling that far, from diamonds to cheap groceries." Their laughter rang in her ears long after she left. The ridicule grew worse when Thomas, her ex-fiancé, decided to return with a vengeance. One evening, Claire and Daniel attended a community event, a fundraiser hosted in the town square. Music played, children ran through the crowd, and food stalls lined the street. For the first time in weeks, Claire almost felt normal. Then Thomas appeared, perfectly dressed, his presence drawing stares. He approached them with a mocking smile, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "So this is the happy couple. Claire, you traded pearls for pennies, silk gowns for second-hand clothes. How does it feel to be the wife of a man who can barely afford his next meal?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to stare, eager for a spectacle. Claire's face burned as Thomas's words echoed like daggers. Daniel stood beside her, silent as ever, but Thomas pressed on. "Tell me, Daniel, how do you plan to keep her happy? Will you patch her dreams the same way you patch old shoes? Or will you let her starve with you in that shabby apartment?" The cruelty cut deeper than Claire expected. She wanted Daniel to speak, to fight back, to shatter the arrogance dripping from Thomas's voice. Instead, Daniel's calm silence filled the air. To Claire, it felt like abandonment. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Some sneered, some pitied, but all eyes were on her. Claire's pride cracked under the weight of their judgment. Her chest tightened, and in her anger and desperation, her voice broke out before she could stop herself. "If you really care about me, Daniel, prove it. Show them you are more than this." The words hung heavy in the air, raw and unforgiving. Daniel's eyes flickered with something she could not read: hurt, disappointment, restraint. But he said nothing. He simply reached for her hand, trying to steady her trembling fingers. Claire pulled away. The sting of humiliation and the ache of disappointment collided inside her. She turned from him, her shoulders stiff, her heart heavy with doubt. To the crowd, it looked like defeat. To Claire, it felt like betrayal. The night ended with silence between them. On the walk home, Claire kept her gaze fixed ahead, her steps quick, her hands clenched. Daniel followed quietly, carrying the weight of words unsaid. Inside the apartment, she finally spoke, her voice sharp and broken. "I cannot live like this anymore. I cannot be the laughingstock of this town. I need to know that I did not ruin my life by marrying you." Daniel did not argue. He only met her eyes with steady calm, the same calm that both comforted and infuriated her. "I cannot prove who I am to the world with words, Claire. Words will never be enough." She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to believe in him, but doubt clawed at her heart. The walls of the apartment felt suffocating. The noise of the outside world seeped into every corner, reminding her of what she had lost and what others believed she had become. That night, Claire lay awake, haunted by the whispers, the laughter, the taunts. She had asked Daniel to prove himself, but deep down she feared that he could not. What she did not know was that the storm she unleashed that evening would soon lead to a revelation powerful enough to silence every cruel voice and change the course of their lives forever. The night after the fundraiser was quiet in Daniel's apartment, but the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, filled with everything Claire wanted to ask and everything Daniel refused to say. She turned away from him in bed, her mind racing. The echo of her own words haunted her. "If you really care about me, prove it." Days passed in strained silence. Claire tried to busy herself with errands, but the whispers from neighbors and the cruel laughter of acquaintances followed her everywhere. Each time, Daniel's calm silence stung like salt on a wound. She told herself she had married a man with nothing, and maybe this was the life she deserved for her impulsive decision. But fate had a way of revealing truth when least expected. One weekend, the town hosted a charity gala. Claire almost refused to attend, but Daniel insisted gently. "It will be good to get out. Come with me," he said, his voice steady. Reluctantly, she agreed, if only to escape the suffocating apartment. The hall was grand, with chandeliers casting golden light over polished floors. Wealthy businessmen mingled, and society's elite laughed over glasses of wine. Claire felt out of place, her modest dress a painful contrast to the gowns shimmering around her. Whispers began almost instantly. "That is her, the one who married the poor man." The words cut deep, but she kept her head high. Then, something happened that left her breathless. As the host took the stage to introduce the event's main benefactor, Claire's world tilted. "Tonight, we thank our largest donor, whose generosity has funded this entire evening," the host announced. "Please welcome Mr. Daniel Hart." The crowd erupted in applause. Claire froze. Her eyes snapped to Daniel, who had quietly risen from his seat. He walked to the stage with the same calm stride he carried everywhere, but now every eye followed him in stunned silence. Claire's heart pounded. Daniel Hart? She had married Daniel, but never once had she known his full name beyond what was written casually on the marriage certificate. Now, the truth unfolded in front of her. The host continued. "Mr. Hart's contributions have built schools, funded hospitals, and supported countless families. He is a man who values integrity over appearance and kindness over vanity." Claire's breath caught. Around her, the whispers turned into gasps. The same people who had mocked her now looked at her with wide eyes. Some mouths hung open in disbelief. Even Thomas, standing near the back, paled as realization sank in. Daniel stood at the podium, his voice steady. "True wealth is not measured in what you wear, or what others say about you. It is measured by what you do with what you have. I never cared for appearances. I care for action." Applause thundered across the hall. Claire sat frozen, tears stinging her eyes. She remembered every simple act, every quiet kindness, every moment he had shielded her from the world without asking for anything in return. The coat he placed on her shoulders, the button he sewed onto her coat, the bills he paid without telling her. All of it had been done not as a poor man trying to survive, but as a man of immense wealth, choosing humility. The gala ended with Daniel surrounded by admirers, but he excused himself quickly, returning to Claire's side as if nothing had changed. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. On the way home, Claire finally found her voice. Why did you not tell me?" Her words trembled, a mix of awe and hurt. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his tone gentle. "Because I wanted to know if you could see me for who I am, not what I own." Her chest tightened. The very thing she had demanded of him to prove himself had always been there, hidden in plain sight. And now, she realized she had judged him not by his actions, but by the world's cruel standards. Tears blurred her vision as they walked. For the first time, she did not know whether to reach for him or to run. The truth was out. The man she had thought poor was a secret millionaire, and nothing between them would ever be the same again. The ride home after the gala was wrapped in silence. Claire sat by the window of the car, her reflection blurred by city lights streaking across the glass. Daniel's revelation thundered in her mind, every memory twisting with new meaning. The quiet man who fixed broken buttons, who rode a bicycle to work, who endured every insult without protest. He had been a millionaire all along. Her heart ached with confusion. She should have felt vindicated. She should have felt proud. But instead, she felt deceived. "You hid this from me," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "All this time, you let me suffer humiliation while you could have stopped it with a single word." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His voice was calm, but heavy. "And if I had stood in front of them and said I was rich, would it have changed their hearts, or yours?" Claire turned away, her chest burning. She had no answer. The silence between them stretched like a canyon, wider than it had ever been. That night, when they returned to the apartment, Claire could not stay. The walls felt suffocating, full of unspoken words and unhealed wounds. She packed a small bag and left without saying more. Daniel did not stop her. He only watched her go, his eyes heavy with something deeper than sorrow. In the days that followed, Claire stayed with a friend across town. She tried to tell herself it was for the best, that she needed space to think. But each night, she lay awake, replaying every act of kindness he had shown her, every word he had not said. She remembered the way he shielded her from whispers, the way he sewed her coat, the way he quietly carried burdens that were not his. At the same time, anger gnawed at her. Why had he not trusted her with the truth? Why had he let her drown in shame, only to rise above it at the very moment she broke? Daniel, meanwhile, carried on as he always had. He continued to work quietly, though now people treated him differently. Neighbors who once mocked him now greeted him with respect, but he did not revel in it. In the evenings he returned to the empty apartment, setting down 2 mugs of tea out of habit, one of them untouched. He never called Claire, never demanded she return. He simply waited, his actions speaking louder than words ever could. Claire saw glimpses of him from afar at the market, helping an elderly woman carry her bags, at the community center, repairing a broken fence. He was still the same Daniel. Wealth had not changed him, and slowly, painfully, she began to realize that what hurt her most was not his secret, but the reflection it cast on her own heart. She had judged him by appearances, by the cruel whispers of others. He had judged her by patience, by her ability to see beyond wealth, and she had failed that test. The distance between them was not just physical now. It was emotional, carved deep by pride and regret. But deep down, Claire knew this was not the end. The weeks after their separation were heavy for Claire. She walked the streets of the city with her head down, avoiding familiar faces, trying to quiet the storm inside her. Each day, she battled herself. Part of her clung to anger, insisting she had been deceived. But another part, the quieter part, whispered of his steady kindness, the kind that never wavered whether he was rich or poor. One evening, as Claire was leaving the small bookstore where she had found temporary work, the sky darkened with sudden thunder. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching the streets. She hurried, clutching her bag, when she heard voices from the alley nearby. Curiosity pulled her closer, and what she saw froze her. Daniel stood there, facing 2 men who looked rough, their voices sharp with threat. They demanded money for a project Daniel had been funding for the community. "You think you can fix this neighborhood without paying us off?" one of them snarled. Daniel stood firm, his posture calm but unyielding. "This money belongs to the people. I will not let you take it." Claire's heart pounded. Fear surged through her as one of the men shoved Daniel hard against the wall. But even then, he did not lash out. Instead, he blocked their path to a group of children who had been hiding nearby, making sure the little ones were safe. Without thinking, Claire rushed forward. "Stop!" she cried, her voice breaking with desperation. The men turned toward her, but before they could move, the flashing lights of a police car cut through the rain. Someone had called for help. The men fled into the night, leaving Daniel leaning against the wall, soaked and breathing heavily. Claire hurried to him, her hands trembling as she touched his arm. "Why did you not tell me? Why did you not let me help you?" Her tears mixed with the rain on her face. Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady even through exhaustion. "Because protecting you mattered more than defending myself. I never wanted you to carry the weight of my battles. I only wanted you to be free." Oh, her heart broke and healed in the same instant. Every doubt, every accusation she had hurled at him seemed so small compared to the truth of his actions. He had never needed wealth to prove himself. His love had always been proven in the way he lived, the way he gave, the way he stood in front of others to shield her and everyone else he cared about. Claire's voice shook as she whispered, "I was blind. I looked at what the world said about you, and I let it decide what I believed. But now I see, you were the only one who never left my side, even when I pushed you away." Daniel's hand brushed against hers, firm and gentle. For the first time, Claire did not pull back. She held on. In that storm, under the weight of fear and the glow of redemption, she realized what love truly meant. It was not status. It was not wealth. It was the willingness to stand in the rain, to face the world's cruelty, to protect someone even when they doubted you. And in that moment, Claire knew her heart had already chosen him. The storm eventually passed, leaving the streets washed clean. But for Claire and Daniel, something deeper had shifted. That night, she stayed by his side, refusing to let go of his hand. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was filled with unspoken promises. The following week, word spread quickly about what had happened in the alley. The community saw Daniel not only as a benefactor, but as a man who stood his ground with courage. The same neighbors who once whispered cruelly about Claire now looked at her with a mix of shame and respect. People began to see what she was only now beginning to fully understand: his worth was never tied to money. It was in his integrity. One evening, Daniel placed the old marriage certificate on the table. The paper was wrinkled, the ink smudged from that rushed, defiant day at the church. Claire stared at it, her chest tightening. She remembered the laughter, the humiliation, the desperate words that had bound them together. Daniel's voice was calm. "We signed this out of impulse, out of pain, but I want us to choose differently now. Not because the world is watching, not because of pride, but because it is what we both want." Tears filled her eyes. She reached for the certificate, her hand trembling. "I thought I had ruined my life that day, but it was the only decision that ever led me to something real." They went together to the courthouse, this time not in a frenzy of defiance, but with steady steps. The clerk stamped their papers officially, sealing the marriage that had begun as an accident but had grown into something unshakable. Claire held Daniel's hand tightly, not caring who saw. Later, at a small gathering with the community, Claire stood beside Daniel as people clapped and cheered. Thomas was there too, his face pale with bitterness. But his sneers no longer mattered. Claire no longer needed validation from him or anyone else. She had already found what she had been searching for all along. Looking up at Daniel, she spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the crowd. "We began as strangers, tied together by a mistake. But today, I stand beside you not because I have to, but because I choose to, and I will keep choosing you every day." The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel's steady eyes softened as he pulled her into his arms. It was not a grand gesture meant to impress, but a simple act that spoke louder than any wealth or status ever could. Their story, once mocked as a scandal, was now celebrated as proof that love built on kindness and truth could withstand any storm. And so, the fake marriage that began in humiliation transformed into a real bond, forged not by appearances, but by trust, sacrifice, and a love that could no longer be denied.